What if one moment of courage could change everything you thought you knew about a person? That's exactly what happened on a cold October evening in 1987, when a 62-year-old waitress named Dorothy Miller did something no one in her right mind would do. She shouted at Vincent Marconi, the most feared man in the city, right there in his own restaurant. The entire dining room went silent. Forks hung midair. Even the kitchen staff froze behind the swinging doors. Vincent's hand was reaching for his plate of linguine when Dorothy's voice cut through the air like a knife. Her weathered hands were shaking, but her eyes held something Vincent hadn't seen in years. Genuine concern mixed with absolute terror. What she said next would unravel 30 years of assumptions and reveal a secret that had been buried since the war. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop a comment and join us for this unforgettable story. Vincent Marconi had owned Bella Naughty for 23 years, and in all that time, no one had ever raised their voice to him. Not the suppliers who came in through the back door, not the businessmen who paid their respects every Friday, and certainly not the staff who knew better than to meet his eyes for too long. He was 70 years old now, with silver hair combed back and hands that still commanded respect despite the arthritis that had started creeping into his knuckles. He ate at the same corner table every Tuesday and Thursday, always ordering the linguine with white clam sauce his late wife Sophia used to make. Dorothy had been working at Bella Naughty for 6 months. She'd taken the job after her husband Frank passed away, needing something to fill the empty hours and help with the bills their fixed income couldn't quite cover. Her daughter Margaret kept telling her to rest, to enjoy retirement, but Dorothy couldn't stand the silence of their little apartment in Queens. The restaurant was loud and warm, and the work kept her hands busy even if it made her feet ache by closing time. She'd noticed Vincent the first week. Everyone had warned her about him, spoke in hushed tones about his business and the men who came to visit him in the back office. But Dorothy saw something else too. She saw how he always left a $50 tip for whoever served him, no matter how simple the meal. How he asked Maria, the young single mother who worked the register, about her son's grades. How his eyes got distant and sad whenever someone ordered the tiramisu, which Dorothy later learned had been Sophia's favorite dessert. That particular October evening started like any other. The dinner rush had calmed down, and Dorothy was refilling water glasses when Vincent arrived. He nodded at her, just a small acknowledgement, but more than he gave most people. She smiled back, that genuine smile she'd given everyone since she was a girl growing up in Brooklyn. Vincent ordered his usual linguine, and Carlo, the head chef, prepared it exactly the way he always did. Dorothy was wiping down table 7 when she heard the kitchen door swing open. She turned to see Marco, one of the young line cooks, carrying Vincent's plate, but something made her look twice. Maybe it was the way Marco's hands trembled slightly. Maybe it was the sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the October chill. Or maybe it was the way he wouldn't meet anyone's eyes as he walked toward Vincent's table. Her heart started pounding. She'd seen that look before. 50 years ago, when her brother Tommy came home from the war with secrets that haunted his dreams. That look of someone carrying guilt they couldn't shake. Dorothy's mind raced. Marco was new, just started 2 weeks ago. She'd heard him on the phone yesterday, speaking in rapid Italian she couldn't quite follow, his voice tight with fear. She watched Marco set the plate down in front of Vincent. Watched Vincent pick up his fork. And suddenly, Dorothy's feet were moving before her brain caught up. All those years of being careful, of minding her business, of keeping her head down, they evaporated in an instant. Don't eat that. The words tore from her throat, louder than she'd intended. The entire restaurant stopped. Every conversation died mid-sentence. The elderly couple at table 3 looked up from their veal. The young family near the window froze with pasta twirled on their forks. Even the music from the speakers seemed to fade away. Vincent's hand stopped halfway to his mouth. His dark eyes locked onto Dorothy's face, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. She just shouted at Vincent Marconi. Sweet Mary and Joseph, what had she done? But then she looked at that plate of linguine, looked at Marco's white face near the kitchen door, and she knew, absolutely knew, that something was terribly wrong. What did you say? Vincent's voice was quiet, but it carried across the silent room like thunder. Dorothy's hands were shaking so hard she had to clasp them together. Her sensible shoes felt rooted to the floor. She was 62 years old, a grandmother of 4, and she'd just thrown away the only job that gave her purpose since Frank died. But she couldn't take it back now. "Please, Mr. Marconi," she whispered, though everyone heard every word in the silence. "Please don't eat that food." Vincent slowly set down his fork. The click of metal against china was the only sound in the entire restaurant. He stood up, his considerable height unfolding from the chair, and Dorothy felt her knees go weak. This was it. This was how her story would end, trying to save a man who probably didn't deserve saving. But wasn't that what Frank always said? That you do the right thing not because people deserve it, but because you do. Vincent took a step toward Dorothy, and she felt every eye in the restaurant watching. Her heart hammered so loudly she could hear it in her ears. But she didn't look away. Couldn't look away. His expression was unreadable, that careful mask he'd worn for so many years. "You want to tell me?" he said slowly, each word measured. "Why I shouldn't eat the food in my own restaurant?" Dorothy swallowed hard. I don't know exactly, but something's wrong with it. I just know it is." Her voice cracked, but she pressed on. "That young man, Marco, he's been nervous all week. And just now, the way he looked." She gestured helplessly toward the kitchen, where Marco had vanished. Vincent's eyes narrowed. Then, without warning, he turned to the 2 men seated at table 9. Men Dorothy had served countless times, but who never ordered food, just coffee they never drank. "Tony, check the kitchen. Find Marco." The men moved immediately, their chairs scraping against the floor. The head chef, Carlo, pushed through the kitchen doors, his face flushed with confusion and anger. "Mr. Marconi, what is this?" "My food is good. I make it myself." "Where's Marco?" Vincent interrupted. "I don't know. He just ran out the back door. Mr. Marconi, I swear to you, I watched him make that plate. I watched him the whole—" Carlo stopped mid-sentence, his face going pale. "The whole time except when I turned to help Paolo with the risotto. Maybe 30 seconds. No more." Vincent picked up the plate of linguine and held it close to his face, inhaling deeply. Then he set it down carefully on the table. "Dorothy," he said, and hearing her name from his lips made her breath catch. "Come here." She forced her feet to move, one painful step at a time, until she stood beside him. Up close, she could see the deep lines around his eyes, the scar above his left eyebrow, the way his jaw was clenched tight. He gestured to the plate. "Tell me what you see." Dorothy looked down at the linguine with white clam sauce. It looked like it always did. Perfectly prepared, steam still rising from the pasta, the clams nestled among the noodles just so. But then, there. Just the tiniest discoloration in the sauce near the edge, a faint chemical smell that didn't belong. "There," she whispered, pointing with a trembling finger. "Something's not right there." Vincent called Carlo over. The chef leaned in, his professional pride warring with growing horror on his face. He grabbed a clean spoon from a nearby table and carefully lifted a small amount of the sauce to his nose. His face went gray. "Mr. Marconi, that's not— I didn't—" He looked like he might be sick right there on the floor. Tony reappeared from the kitchen, slightly out of breath. Back door was left open. "Marco's gone. Found this in his locker." He handed Vincent a cell phone, the cheap, disposable kind. Vincent pressed a few buttons, and Dorothy watched his face harden into something she'd never seen before. Not anger, something colder. Something that made her understand why people feared him. "Everyone out," Vincent said quietly. "Customers, staff, everyone except Dorothy, Tony, and Carlo. Now." The restaurant emptied in less than 3 minutes. The confused murmurs, the scraping chairs, the worried glances, all of it faded as the door closed behind the last patron. Dorothy stood there, still shaking, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. If maybe she'd misread everything and destroyed her job over nothing. Vincent turned to her, and his eyes were different now. Softer somehow, but filled with something that looked like wonder. "How did you know?" he asked. "How did you see what even Carlo missed?" Dorothy's hands twisted in her apron. My brother, Tommy. He came back from the war different. Paranoid, they called it. But he was right to be careful. He taught me to watch people's hands, their eyes, the way they hold their bodies when they're lying or afraid. Marco was terrified of something, and I couldn't, her voice broke. I couldn't stand by and watch someone die. Not even you, Mr. Marconi. God help me, I couldn't do it. The silence stretched between them like a living thing. Then Vincent did something that shocked Dorothy to her core. He reached out and gently took her hand in both of his. His skin was warm, his grip steady despite the arthritis she knew bothered him. You saved my life tonight, Dorothy Miller. Do you understand that? Someone wanted me dead, and you, a woman who's worked here 6 months, who has every reason to stay quiet and keep your job, you risked everything to warn me. Tears spilled down Dorothy's cheeks before she could stop them. All the fear, all the adrenaline, all the memories of Tommy and Frank and every loss she'd carried, it all came out in that moment. I just did what was right, she whispered. That's all. Just what was right. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. Stories like Dorothy's remind us that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet voice that speaks up when everyone else stays silent. Vincent released her hand and turned to Tony. Find Marco, I want to know who sent him and why, but Tony. He paused, his voice dropping lower. When you find him, I want him alive and unharmed. Understand? Tony nodded and left through the back door. Carlo stood there wringing his hands, still in shock, and Dorothy, exhausted and overwhelmed, sank into the nearest chair as Vincent sat down across from her. We need to talk, he said gently, because I think there's more to this story than either of us knows. And Dorothy, he met her eyes directly, I think you might be the only person in this city I can trust right now. Dorothy wiped her eyes with a napkin Carlo quietly handed her. Her hands still hadn't stopped shaking, and she couldn't quite believe she was sitting at a table with Vincent Marconi, alone in the empty restaurant while somewhere out there, someone had tried to kill him. The reality of it crashed over her in waves. I don't understand, she said quietly. Who would want to hurt you? And why would they send a boy like Marco? Vincent leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked old. Not powerful or intimidating, just tired and worn down by years of living a life Dorothy couldn't imagine. That's what I need to figure out, he said. But I need you to understand something first, Dorothy. The things people say about me, most of them are true. I'm not a good man. I've done things, he paused, his jaw working, things I can't take back, things I'll answer for someday. We've all done things we regret, Dorothy said softly, thinking of the years she'd let pride keep her from reconciling with her own sister. That doesn't mean you deserve to be poisoned in your own restaurant. Vincent let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his chest for years. You sound like Sophia, my wife. She used to say the same thing, that everyone deserves a chance at redemption. His eyes grew distant. She died 5 years ago. Cancer. And I promised her, in that hospital room, that I'd find a way out. Find a way to make things right. He looked at Dorothy directly. I've been trying, you know. Trying to go legitimate. Sell off the businesses, the operations. Turn everything clean. But when you've been in this life as long as I have, people don't want to let you leave. Too many secrets. Too much money on the line. Dorothy felt a pang in her chest. She understood more than he knew about trying to rebuild after loss. After Frank died, she'd spent months just going through the motions, not really living. The restaurant job had saved her in ways she hadn't even realized until now. So someone doesn't want you to leave. Worse than that, Vincent said, his voice dropping. I think someone wants to take over completely. And if they can blame my death on food poisoning, on an accident in my own restaurant, well, that's better for business than an obvious hit. Keeps things quiet. Keeps the heat off. The back door opened, and Tony stepped in, his face grim. With him was Marco, the young cook, his face streaked with tears, his hands bound with rope. Dorothy's heart clenched at the sight. He was just a boy, really. Maybe 25, with his whole life ahead of him. Found him at the bus station, Tony said. He was crying so hard I almost felt sorry for him. Marco looked at Vincent with terror in his eyes. Then his gaze shifted to Dorothy. I'm sorry, he sobbed. I'm so sorry. They have my sister. My little sister, Rosa. They said they'd kill her if I didn't do it. They said it would be quick, that he wouldn't suffer, but I couldn't. His words dissolved into broken Italian and tears. Dorothy stood up without thinking and walked to the young man. She'd seen that same desperate look on Tommy's face when he'd tried to explain the things he'd done during the war. The things he'd been ordered to do. She reached out and touched Marco's shoulder gently. "How old is your sister?" she asked softly. 16, Marco choked out. "Just 16. She came here from Sicily 3 months ago to live with me, to go to school. And these men, they grabbed her from the subway. They said if I told anyone or went to the police, they'd—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Have you ever faced an impossible choice where every option seemed wrong? Where protecting someone you love meant betraying everything you believed in? Share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes just knowing we're not alone in our struggles helps more than we realize. Vincent stood up slowly, his face a mask of control, but Dorothy could see the calculation behind his eyes. "What men, Marco? Describe them, every detail." As Marco stumbled through his description, 2 men with New Jersey accents, one with a tattoo of a snake on his hand, the other with a scar across his cheek. Dorothy watched Vincent's expression change. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by something that looked like rage and betrayal mixed together. "I know who sent them," Vincent said quietly, dangerously. "My own nephew, Salvatore." He looked at Tony. "Call everyone. Every man we have. We're getting Marco's sister back tonight." Then he turned to Marco, his voice gentler. "You're not going to die, son. And neither is Rosa. But you're going to help me end this, once and for all." Dorothy felt the weight of the moment settle over them all. This was the turning point, the place where everything would either fall apart completely or somehow, impossibly, come together. The next 3 hours moved like a blur Dorothy would remember in fragments for the rest of her life. Vincent made calls from the back office, his voice steady and commanding, orchestrating something she couldn't fully understand but felt in her bones was dangerous. Marco sat at a table with untied hands, drinking water Dorothy brought him, his whole body still shaking with fear and relief. Tony came and went, each time bringing back information, addresses, descriptions, patterns of movement. "Why are you still here?" Vincent asked Dorothy at one point, emerging from the office with his jacket on. "You should go home. This isn't your fight." But Dorothy shook her head, surprising herself. "That girl is 16, the same age as my granddaughter Emma. If Emma was in trouble..." She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Vincent's face softened with understanding. "Then stay with Carlo," he said. "Keep the phone by you. If something goes wrong, you call this number." He handed her a business card with nothing but digits on it. "Promise me, Dorothy. If you don't hear from me by midnight, you call that number and you tell them everything." She took the card with trembling fingers and promised. Vincent, Tony, and 2 other men left through the back door. Marco wanted to go with them, but Vincent ordered him to stay. "You did your part, son. You got out of it alive and you told us what we needed to know. Let me do the rest." The waiting was agony. Dorothy and Carlo sat in the dining room. The lights dimmed, watching the clock on the wall tick toward 10 o'clock, then 10:30. Carlo made coffee they didn't drink. Marco paced near the kitchen, his prayers whispered in Italian that Dorothy recognized even if she couldn't understand the words. She found herself praying too, something she hadn't done much since Frank's funeral. Not asking for miracles, just for Rosa to be safe, for no one to die tonight because of greed and power. At 11:15, Dorothy's phone rang. She nearly dropped it in her haste to answer. "Hello? We have her." Vincent's voice, rough with exhaustion but steady. "Rosa's safe. We're bringing her to the restaurant now. Tell Marco." Dorothy relayed the message, and Marco collapsed to his knees, sobbing with relief. When Vincent walked through the door 20 minutes later with a terrified teenage girl clutching his arm, Marco ran to his sister with a cry that made Dorothy's heart ache. The siblings held each other, Rosa's small frame shaking as she cried into her brother's shoulder, both of them speaking rapid Italian through their tears. Vincent had a cut above his eye and his knuckles were scraped, but he was alive. That's what mattered. Dorothy found herself standing, walking to him without conscious thought, needing to see for herself that he was truly okay. Mr. Marconi, Vincent, he interrupted gently. I think after tonight, you've earned the right to call me Vincent. Vincent, she repeated, the name foreign on her tongue. What about your nephew? Salvatore? Vincent's face hardened. He's alive. Handed over to some people who'll make sure he can't hurt anyone again. Not dead, he added, seeing her expression. Sophia made me promise no more killing. I keep my promises to her even now. But Salvatore won't be a problem anymore. Neither will the men he hired. The weight of what had happened seemed to settle over the restaurant like dust after a storm. Rosa was safe. Marco hadn't been forced to become a killer. Vincent was alive. And Dorothy, little Dorothy Miller from Queens, widow and grandmother, had somehow been at the center of it all. You changed everything tonight, Vincent said quietly, looking at her with something like wonder. If you hadn't spoken up, I'd be dead. Marco would be a murderer. Rosa... He didn't finish that sentence. You saw what no one else saw. You cared when staying quiet would have been easier and safer. Why? Dorothy thought about Frank, about Tommy, about all the years of her life and the lessons she'd learned. Because someone did it for me once, she said softly. When I was 19 working in a factory, I was being cornered by the foreman. An older woman, I never even knew her name, she stepped in. Made a scene. Probably lost her job for it. But she saved me. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. I promised myself that day that I'd do the same for someone else if I ever got the chance. Tonight was that chance. If you've been moved by this story of courage and redemption, please subscribe to our channel. We share stories like this one. Real tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, because we believe these stories matter, especially now. Click that subscribe button and join our community. Vincent reached out and took both her hands in his. I owe you my life, Dorothy Miller, and I pay my debts. Name anything you want, anything at all. Dorothy looked at this man, this complicated, dangerous, grieving man who kept his promises to a dead wife and who'd risked everything to save a stranger's sister. And she knew exactly what she wanted. Help me help you, she said simply. You promised Sophia you'd go legitimate. Let me help you keep that promise. Vincent stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look 20 years younger. You're serious, completely, Dorothy said. And she was. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Dorothy learned quickly that untangling 30 years of Vincent's life required patience, courage, and more coffee than her doctor would approve of. She started coming to Bellinade every day. Not as a waitress anymore, but as something Vincent called his consultant. Though really, she was his conscience, his anchor to the normal world he'd left behind decades ago. In those first weeks, Dorothy sat in on meetings that would have terrified her 6 months earlier. Men with hard faces and harder reputations came through the back door, and Dorothy learned to read their intentions the way she'd learned to read Marco's fear that fateful night. Some were allies in Vincent's transition away from crime. Others needed to be convinced that going legitimate was better than going to war. Dorothy's presence, this grandmother with her sensible shoes and direct gaze, somehow made those conversations work. She reminded them all of mothers and wives, of the lives they claimed they were protecting. Rosa and Marco stayed in New York. Vincent set Marco up in a culinary school, the kind of proper training the young man had always dreamed about. Rosa enrolled in high school and came to the restaurant every day after classes, doing her homework at table 12 while Dorothy checked in on her. The girl bloomed under Dorothy's attention, her English improving, her fear fading into cautious hope. She reminded Dorothy so much of Emma, that same bright spark, that determination to build something better. Carlo, relieved beyond measure that his kitchen had been vindicated, became one of Dorothy's closest allies. Together they worked on transforming Bellinade into something different, not just a restaurant, but a training program for young people like Marco, who needed a second chance. Vincent funded it all, quietly, using money he'd set aside over the years. Money, he told Dorothy, that Sophia had always wanted him to use for something good. Vincent's nephew Salvatore was indeed alive, serving a long sentence after cutting a deal with prosecutors. Vincent had handed over evidence, carefully through lawyers. that helped put away several other dangerous men while protecting the people who'd simply been trying to survive. It wasn't perfect justice, Dorothy knew. Some people deserved worse than they got, and others suffered more than they should have. But it was something. It was progress. The real change, though, happened slowly in Vincent himself. Dorothy watched him soften, watched him smile more, watched him stop looking over his shoulder quite so often. He started attending Mass again, something Sophia had begged him to do for years. He sat in the back pew, and Dorothy sat beside him, neither of them particularly holy, but both of them trying to be better, trying to honor the people they'd lost and the second chances they'd been given. One Tuesday evening, almost a year after that night, Vincent and Dorothy sat at his corner table after closing. The restaurant was quiet, peaceful. Rosa was doing her calculus homework nearby, and Marco was in the kitchen practicing a new dessert recipe. It felt like family, like home. "I've been thinking," Vincent said, stirring sugar into his espresso, "about what you said. About paying my debt to you. Vincent, we've been through this." "Just listen," he interrupted gently. "I can't give you money. You won't take it. Can't give you power or protection or any of the things I used to trade in. But there's something I can give you." He pulled out a small, worn photograph from his wallet. It showed a young couple on their wedding day, the bride in a simple white dress, the groom in an army uniform. "This was Sophia and me, 1960, right before I shipped out to Germany." Dorothy took the photo carefully, studying the young faces. "You were so young, 22. Didn't know anything about life or love or what it meant to make promises you'd actually keep." Vincent's voice was soft with memory. "Sophia taught me all that, and then I spent 30 years betraying those lessons, until I almost lost sight of them completely." He looked at Dorothy directly. "You reminded me. You showed me that it's never too late to be the person you promised you'd be. That's the gift you gave me, Dorothy. And what I want to give you is this. My story. All of it. The real story, not the one the newspapers tell." Dorothy felt tears prick her eyes. "Why would you—" "Because stories matter," Vincent said simply. "Because somewhere out there, someone else is trapped in a life they hate, thinking it's too late to change. And if they hear about a 71-year-old man who finally kept his promise to his dead wife, who finally found his way out of the darkness, maybe they'll believe they can too." Dorothy understood then. This was bigger than both of them. This was about hope, that stubborn, resilient thing that keeps pushing through concrete to reach the light. "Then we'll tell it," she promised. "Together." Vincent smiled. And in that smile, Dorothy saw the young soldier from the photograph, the man Sophia had fallen in love with, the man he'd been trying to find his way back to for 5 long years. "Together," he agreed. They sat there as the evening deepened into night, talking and planning. 2 unlikely friends bound by a moment of courage and a shared belief that people can change, that it's never too late, that sometimes the most ordinary act, speaking up, caring enough to risk everything, can alter the course of lives in ways we never imagine. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like this video. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts or your own stories of second chances, and subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt tales that remind us of our shared humanity. Every story we tell is a testament to the power of hope, courage, and redemption. Thank you for joining us on Dorothy and Vincent's journey. May we all have the courage to speak up when it matters, to see the humanity in unexpected places, and to believe that change is always possible. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.